Great, thanks, Debbie. It's 2:19. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order for the West Turlock Subbasin GSA TAC, and Kevin Kaufman is here for East Turlock.
Yes, I will open the meeting for East Turlock Subbasin GSA, and we do have a quorum made up of yourself, Walt, myself, and Dennis, I believe.
For the West Turlock, is there anybody on the line who has joined after we did a round of introductions, a member of the West Turlock TAC? Right now, I have PID, the City of Ceres, Hillmark County Water District, Stanislaus County, and Merced County represented, which is 5 of the 6 agencies we need to have a quorum. Okay, for
say Stanislaus.
Yep, we have Stanislaus here.
Okay, great.
Do we have anybody from the City of Turlock? No. I think we just have 5 agencies, so we don't have a quorum. Perhaps later in the meeting, we'll check and see if anybody joined us. At that time, we'll move on to item number 2. The West Turlock TAC can't take action to approve the minutes, but East Turlock can do that. The minutes were included in the agenda packet. If anybody has any comments or questions on the minutes, go ahead and take a look. And Kevin, if your TAC wants to take action on those, go ahead.
Kevin, this is Dennis from Felico Cortez. I move to accept the minutes.
I second that, Walt.
Any further discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody who's against signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, it passes. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So now we'll go on to item number 3, public participation. This is the time set aside for members of the public to directly address the technical advisory committees on any item of interest to the public that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of the TAC. Is there anybody from the public who would like to address the joint TAC? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move on to item number 4, the budget items. And I do just want to give a heads up that I have to step away from my phone at 2:30, but Kevin is going to keep us on agenda and on time. So if you hear a different voice pop in, that's Kevin continuing to run this meeting. Let's move over to Michael Clipper, the treasurer with the West Turlock Subbasin GSA for the budget update, item number 4.
Yes, Michael Clipper with TID. The balance for the West Turlock account at the end of March, on March 31st, was $134,301.80. Any questions on the West Turlock account? Okay, hearing none, moving on to the basin-wide account. At the end of March, we had $819,200.23. Please note that I think we're getting close to ending our reimbursement with DWR on the original grant. So as some of these invoices are coming through, we will be paying the entire amount as opposed to being reimbursed. So that will be kind of the burn through cash rate will start picking up here over the next 6 months or so. But other than that, everything looks good.
Great, thanks, Michael. Any questions for Michael Clipper? And Kevin, do you have a budget update for East Turlock GSA?
Yes, Kevin here. No numbers. Coming up to the end of the year, we're going to be right down to our contingency amount and dipping into our contingency a little bit to make the final bills. We have a contingency amount of about $30,000. Other than that, the JPA board met this morning and considered an initial budget draft from Karen Whip, worked on by myself and others. And there was general feeling that we're headed in the right direction, but more information was needed. So a final review is expected at the May meeting, and approval will be at that time. The only thing I'd add is that unless Walt or Lacey, who were in the meeting, have anything additional to add, the only thing I'll add is that the board did take formal action to approve the split for the second grant. I believe it's a Prop 68 grant. So unless there's questions, that's all I had to report.
Can you explain what the split means? We can talk offline.
I think that might be the perfect introduction to item number 5.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I agree with you. That's what the split is.
Yeah. So Michael Clipper, why don't we move into item number 5, budget recommendation for proposed, or for Proposition 68 grant cash flow. Michael Clipper.
Okay. Yes, Herb, if you want to put up so basically, we received another round of grant funding for various projects. I believe there's 3 different types of projects that are going on. I believe I've shared this with pretty much all the member agencies so far, and kind of revised it mainly with labeling. But basically for the new fiscal year, we will invoice the total amount on the 4th column there. So we will we'll collect $285,440 in total, and then each of the various agencies will owe their respective amounts. So for like TID, we'll owe $58,000. And that is a combination of expenses and needed reserves on hand in order to pay invoices for bills that will come in for the various projects and then be reimbursed by DWR. So basically the first column is the application cost for the proposal. The next one would be quarterly cash flow. So as what current practice is now is we start incurring costs. We pay January, February, March invoices. We then summarize all of that and submit it to DWR. And then in a couple of months, we get, usually by like May or so, we get reimbursed for those expenses. Same thing will happen with the second round of grant funding. So we'll need those 3 to 4 months worth of invoices to pay, because it will be paid in arrears with that. Secondly, so that's that first. So it's like it's on quarterly. Whatever interval we get reimbursed on. The next column is retention. So say on January, February, March, we have invoices totaling $100,000. We submit that $100,000 to DWR. We get $90,000 back. So they'll retain 10% of the grant throughout the whole entire process. So that's it'll be about $100,000. I put a little extra there partly because everyone's kind of familiar with their portion of 120,000. So all said, and so that's basically the total that we will be kind of responsible for. And then at the end of the project, we should have, if everything goes well, $240,000 given back to us or in reserve in our account for the entire basin. Any questions?
Good report, Michael. This is Kevin again. Lacey had to leave for a quick meeting. She'll be back. Are there any other questions for Michael? Hearing none, let's move on to, was any action recommended today, Michael?
Well, ideally, I'd like to take a recommendation from the West TAC, but I don't think we have a quorum. I have mentioned it. I mean, I'll say we reviewed it with them multiple times. When I take it, I'm going to take this to adopt it with the board at their next meeting, which is in a couple weeks.
Okay.
But there could be an action by the East Turlock.
Oh, okay.
And the board pretty much approved it this morning, but Dennis, Walt, if you'd like to take an additional action to approve it for the record, I wouldn't object.
Walt, move approval.
Thanks,
Dennis,
Walt.
second.
Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
If you're against this, please signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, it passes unanimously. Thank you both.
Thank
Kevin,
you.
before we move on,
Sure.
do you think it's possible to inquire if there are any new are there any other members of the West Turlock that came on after we started the meeting and did our original roll call?
Good question, Debbie. Please speak up if you come on the original roll call.
Debbie, this is Valerie. Maybe we should go through and just call again. I don't know if, obviously, we've got TID, someone from Stanislaus County, someone from Merced County. Was there a Hillmar County Water District?
I'm here.
Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Do we have anyone from Denair Community Services? Delhi County Water District? Any member on? City of Turlock? No. City of Modesto? City of Houston? Or City of Ceres?
And Lacey, as a reminder, we have Michelle from Keys Community Services District on as well.
And Karen from Ceres is here.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I've got 6 represented. How many do you need for a quorum?
We need 6. 1.
So we've got Keys, Hillmar, Ceres, Merced, Stanislaus, and Turlock.
Right. But Keys is an associate member.
Oh, okay.
So they don't actually have a board seat. So we would need someone from City of Houston, City of Modesto, City of Turlock, Delhi, or Denair. Sounds like. So those are our missing members.
Well, maybe Valerie, the way we could proceed then for Michael's benefit and going to the West JPA board in a couple of weeks is to make an email. Well, first of all, does anybody from the West Turlock Subbasin GSA see there's going to be an objection from their agency on this cash flow recommendation?
Kevin, this is Michael.
No.
Cook. No, there's no issue for us.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
So maybe Michael Clipper then can go ahead and just contact those that are not here to give them some comfort level before going to the JPA board.
Sure, yeah.
I would,
He can go to that board and say there's a recommendation from the east, and he contacted everyone and there's no objection from the west. I don't think he can say there's a recommendation, but I think that that's fine.
Okay. That work for you, Michael?
yes, and I've reviewed it with multiple members over the past couple of months, so I feel confident in it.
Okay. Well, let's move on to item number 6 then. The Proposition 68 grant requirements. It's going to be a discussion and possible recommendation of GSA boards regarding the grant agreement. And Debbie, do you want to take this on?
yes, actually, I'm gonna, I've been working with Michael Cook and Michael Clipper on this item, and I was gonna turn it over to Michael Cook.
Perfect.
If that's okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so here I am. So as part of the grant agreement, we have to have, I'm pulling up here on my computer, the GSA has to have its own competitive bidding and procurement requirements. And so basically any goods that we acquire have to go through some type of formal process that the board has adopted, or the boards have adopted. I think this is to get away from maybe in the past with grants, you have agencies just procuring goods and services without going through some type of formal process and spending money, and then so the state's kind of clamping down on that. So basically we have to have a written policy to award contracts through a competitive bidding process or a sole source process. And if we don't have that, we have to use the state's Department of General Services contracting manual. So the thought is TID has existing procurement policies that basically the GSA could piggyback off of. So when we hire a consultant, or we do a public works project, or we purchase materials, we basically use the process that TID has in place that's already written down, that follows the appropriate processes from either the water code or the public works contracting code or government code or whatever it is, and just kind of go from there. The one kind of caveat on that is TID has pretty high expenditure limits. Lots of things can be purchased at the AGM or GM level. And the question we've been debating is what level of involvement do we want the GSA board to have in awarding contracts and purchasing materials and awarding public works contracts. So I know when I worked for the city of Turlock, it was pretty low and pretty much everything had to go to the city council, whereas TID, very few things actually go to the board. Most things are approved at the GM or AGM level. So that was the thought, and given the fact that Michael Clipper is the treasurer, we maintain the same check processing process where he gets appropriate signatures from the TAC and then the board chair or vice chair, and kind of go from there. So that's my spiel. Debbie, did I miss anything?
No, I think that works. Also, I wanted to remind the TAC that our purchasing department, the TID's purchasing department, has kind of been the quasi purchasing department for the GSA in essence, as we've moved through, and the TGBA actually, as we've moved through hiring consultants to help us with our SIGMA process. And so they helped us in going through a bidding process to hire our consultants and do that to date. And so we would kind of envision continuing that effort. Again, making sure that we get the GSA approvals as we move forward as well. Kind of similar to what we've been doing, but it would be more formalized.
So Debbie, this is Kevin. Do we need a recommendation from the board or a motion from the TAC rather to agree to those procedures that we've been using in the past and use those for our contract under this Prop 68 grant?
Well, there is the agenda item is set up so that it enables a recommendation should the TAC wish to. And since the West Turlock doesn't have a quorum at this point, if the East Turlock is in favor of such an approach for the grant application, or not the application, but the grant administration, that might be helpful as we move forward with the taking it to the West Turlock GSA board, because then they know that you guys are comfortable with moving forward with that type of approach for the grant.
Thank you, Debbie. And Dennis and Walt, are you comfortable? Would you agree to make a motion to that effect?
Sure, I will.
Thank you, Dennis. How about you, Walt?
I'll second that, support it.
Thank you. Any further discussion from the east side? All those in favor of signifying that requesting that the TID act as the purchasing agent and we use their contracting procedures for this Prop 68 grant agreement, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any against that motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you all for that. Anything further, Debbie?
No, thank you.
Welcome. Okay, item 7, the GSP schedule and release of draft chapters. I have Phyllis down for this, is that correct?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. It's nice to hear everyone's voice again. As in past TAC meetings, I've been asked to lead the discussion on a few of the technical issues. And Herb is sharing my screen with me right now. And as soon as I can see the bottom here, I will get into slideshow. Let's just see if we can do it.
I'm getting there in 5 seconds.
Okay, great. We're going to be going through technical issues associated with, I think I have it now, with several of the, thank you, with several of the agenda items, including item number 7, which is this one, to talk about potential early release of draft GSP chapters. Item number 8, which is the sustainable management criteria. That's just a continued discussion that we've been having for the last 2 TAC meetings. And then agenda item number 9 on seawater intrusion sustainability indicator. So moving forward here with the agenda item number 7, here is our schedule. Many of you have seen this before. The star shows sort of where we are now with respect to, you can think of these green bars as sort of chapters of the GSP. So we have talked before about the possibility of early publication of some of the draft GSP sections so that we can facilitate the public review of a very large document. Many stakeholders have been involved throughout this process, and it's 2 years running now. And you know, they would like to be able to see some of the written product that we've got available for them. We thought we might do this in sort of 2 parts. The technical portions of the GSP are the ones that have been mostly completed and a lot of progress on to date. And if you look on the schedule, those are generally those green bars that are in 2018 and 2019. And then those would be the ones that we might target for early release within 2020. And then the remaining chapters will be discussed, of course, as we go through them, but they will be the ones targeted for a 90-day review period in mid-2021, which is also shown there on the schedule. 3 chapters have already been prepared to date. Those are shown by the sort of arrows. Chapter number 1 on administrative information, chapter number 2, plan area. Chapter number 4 is the hydrogeologic conceptual model and groundwater conditions combined. We actually completed most of these 3 chapters in 2018. For the chapter number 4, we've recently gotten more comments on those, and we're incorporating those now and reorganizing the process. Because the chapter it's been a long time since it's been out and people have commented on it, we'll need to get that back to the TAC for the review of how we've incorporated their comments, and think that that could possibly be ready May, June. The one thing that I want to point out is that the groundwater dependent ecosystems section has not yet been completed. We've been planning to initiate that in June. This was an identification of GDEs in the subbasin task for the GSP. It was really not fully funded because we didn't have any of the DWR published maps now that are available with respect to potential areas of GSP, which we found helpful. And so we are looking at an additional approach. We discussed that with the TAC in October, and we're going to be initiating that in June, working with the TAC members between now and then to flush out that approach. So that section specifically would not be completed in chapter number 4. And so one of the things that I'd like for the TAC members to consider for us today is if they would like to move forward with publishing an incomplete GDE analysis, everything else in this section would be essentially done, or if they would prefer to hold that until after that's done. And I'm gonna formally ask you that question in a second, but let me go ahead and go to the next couple of slides so we can take everything at once here. So there are 2 additional draft chapters that are in progress. One is the description of the model selection, revision, calibration, which is actually going to be appendix to this document, and then the application of that model to the subbasin water budgets. We reviewed those water budgets last April and then recognized that we had some more work we needed to do on the model. We reviewed the final water budget drafts out of the model in December, and we are now working along the Tuolumne River with the Modesto Subbasin, because the Modesto Subbasin is using the same model that we are using, and we are calibrating along that shared river boundary. So recognizing that we need to get that boundary figured out before we can finalize the water budgets, we think that that chapter would probably be available in the September-October timeframe, pending the final Modesto model calibration, which we expect to be done in June. But models, and we may need some additional time there for revision. So I've been a little conservative with my approach here. And so what all of this means is that we would have chapters available potentially in June and or the September-October timeframe. So I've shown there June, October as potential early publication of draft chapters. And so the question I'd like to get input from the TAC members, if possible today, and if not in the next week, what do you see with respect to early release of incomplete chapters? Would you prefer that chapter 4 be held until the GDE identification process has been completed? Would you like to have the chapter on plan area and administrative information released in June? Or do you want to just wait until October and get everything that's technical released all at the same time? If people are willing to discuss this now and give me some feedback, that would be great. Do people have preferences?
I think, this is Curtis from Hillmar. I just think that we run a little bit of a risk if we go with an early release of kind of incomplete information.
Mm-hmm.
I think that just aids in people's wires getting crossed and maybe not knowing what's going on. My personal thought, and I'm just, one voice here, would be that we get a little further down the road and try and release a more complete package.
I understand. Anybody else have a thought?
Hi, this is Debbie Weaversbach with the TID. I would agree. I think if we could kind of wrap it all together in a clean package, it might be a little better, but still also providing it earlier on than waiting until the very end. And we could reconsider this as we get further along with the GD process. If we find that that's going to take much longer, you know, we could reassess.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment? Okay, great. Hearing none, if you have if we hang up the call and you decide that you want to say something about this, that you missed your opportunity, shoot me an email through Tara. She has all of our contact information, and we will certainly look at that. But I think that makes sense. Curtis and Debbie's comments are mirrored of other comments that I've heard, specifically when I spoke with the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. They represented and echoed these same sentiments, that they'd like to see it as complete as possible, and at the same time provide everyone with the opportunity for early review if possible. Okay, so that's going to be our moving forward target then, even though the TAC will begin to see their revisions that have been incorporated in Section 4 much sooner than that, probably next month. Okay.
So it's Kevin here.
Yes, hi.
Lacey is back, so I'll let her take over as chair, but I did have one quick question. As far as like the water budgets bar that you have on the map there, I understand the water budgets are going to be kind of revised in May. Is there going to be a revision to the Gantt chart that you have there?
Yes, yes, I've already been asked to do that, and should have done it for today and didn't get to it, but absolutely. We're just trying to sort of coordinate with the Modesto model, and it's difficult right now to know exactly when that's going to happen, but we do think you will hear some of that at our coordination meeting, which has now been scheduled for May.
Okay, super. Thank you, that's all I had.
Thank you. Okay, then if nothing else on that, would like to just quickly move on then to item number 8, and to continue talking about sustainable management criteria. If everyone feels like that we are still on number 1, you're right. But the good news is that my experience has been that that's the toughest. And once you get the chronic lowering of water levels and storage issues sort of straightened out, the rest of it sort of falls into place. So let's just move forward with our continued discussion. Here is the process. We've seen this slide a couple of times. This is just my representation of where we're headed. The first step for all of the sustainability indicators that SGMA has defined, and there are 6 of them that we've talked about before, is to analyze each one of those 6 sustainability indicators. Analyze them with respect to your conditions in the groundwater basin. And then step number 2, define undesirable results, conditions that the GSAs absolutely want to avoid, and conditions that they find to be something that they want to manage to avoid. Step number 3 is to select a construct for developing thresholds and objectives such that those undesirable results are avoided. And that typically results in a metric or some sort of indicator number, a quantitative value. For example, chronic lowering of water levels would be a water level. We can define that water level generally over large areas if representative, or we can define them in specified GSP monitoring locations. And once we develop sort of a construct and an understanding of how the GSAs and the TAC wants to review and consider undesirable results, then we can move through that process. And then number 4 is exactly what I just said, applying those metrics at GSP monitoring locations across the basin. So to continue on the discussion, we talk a lot about chronic lowering of water levels, and it's sort of being that this is the sustainability indicator that really relates more to wells. And I have heard Walt say this, so I'm sort of mimicking Walt a bit about chronic lowering of water levels. You can see on my little conceptual diagram there of a well that I've included sort of a generalized discussion of what chronic might mean in the construct of what we're doing here. The chronic lowering of water levels really indicates a long-term decline over average hydrologic conditions. And even if we're stabilizing or recovering during wet periods, we continue to go down, and we go down even further than we did in previous drought conditions, then that can indicate chronic lowering of water levels. And because we've had several discussions about this already, I thought it might be helpful to, number one, summarize, and number two, sort of break the process down into smaller steps for moving forward to actually get specified input from the TAC members on key questions. And so I'm going to just quickly look at what we've discussed with respect to beneficial uses, with respect to negative impacts of the historic low levels, which is something that we want to have in the GSP as a narrative discussion of what those impacts might be, and whether or not the GSAs would consider them to be undesirable results. So, and then, a review and sort of approval of some of these prior discussions I think would be helpful for moving forward. So let's look first at beneficial uses. And I've just sort of listed them here depending on how you categorize them. There's maybe 3 or 4 that I think are the primary ones. Agricultural, of course, is the largest. I've just used some of the numbers that we have been using from the water budget analyses that we've been working with. So the 351,000 acre feet a year beneficial use of agriculture is from that water budget analysis. For municipalities and urban communities, about 39,000 acre feet a year. It's a little bit difficult to separate out the second and third bullet because some of the urban communities could also be considered small water systems, but for the purposes of how we've broken it out in the model, domestic and sort of the smaller, more transient community water systems equals about 20,000 acre feet a year. And then there are environmental uses that are not yet defined. We have a riparian indication of about 8,000 acre feet a year of environmental use along the river, but that's just of water. And so what portion of that is actually groundwater use? That's something that we're going to need to do a little more work on. Number one, as we recalibrate the model along the Tuolumne River, that will help in that process. And then as we begin to do the GDE identification analysis, that would also help with that process. The GDEs, of course, we have information for potential GDEs along the downstream river reaches and some inland areas as well. We're going to be evaluating those using the DWR NCOG maps. We call them the natural communities commonly associated with groundwater. This is a very nice polygon mapping technique that DWR has done with in connection with California Fish and Wildlife and also the Nature Conservancy. So the quantification of those are not yet on our water budgets here, but essentially does everyone feel like we have all of the beneficial uses of groundwater identified on this chart? And I'm gonna let that sit with you a bit, and we're gonna deal with it in a few slides, but let's go now to what some of the negative impacts have been that we've been talking about with respect to lowered water levels. And we've been using the recent drought because it's been actually a very valuable time period because it was essentially the historic lows in the basin at a time that was relatively recent. So it applied to our current infrastructure that we have in the basin. And this is my representation of all of the input that you have provided to the technical team over the last 2 main TAC meetings in February and in March. And if I have called your name, the agency's name out there, and you think your agency name needs to be there too, then you can certainly let me know. I was trying more by putting the agency names down, I was trying more to just simply remind us who specifically had identified these as specific negative impacts for their system. And so that's the only reason for having the names that I have down there, to kind of help me remember who identified these as really negative impacts. So the list there, you can see we have dry domestic wells, certainly as a negative impact from the Stanislaus and Merced County programs that they had, and the Delhi well protection program that was mentioned at the TAC meeting. There have been some failed shallow older domestic wells, as Stanislaus County has very well documented, many of those wells being less than 100 feet and more than 50 years old that actually failed during the drought of record. We heard about collapsed casing in municipal wells, losses of capacity in municipal wells such that the wells actually had to be deepened. There were some dry landscape irrigation wells reported by the city of Turlock. TID noted that they rent agricultural wells for additional supply, and those couldn't be used because of a loss of capacity. And then there was also the issue where there were domestic well owners calling and saying, you know, tell the agricultural well owners they have to turn those wells off because they're affecting our wells. So there was a competing interest there with respect to use of the groundwater. Water quality issues were identified with lowered water levels. The ones that I heard noted were arsenic, nitrate, and or TDS. And then concerns about aging wells that really were at risk of failure during another similar drought in particular. In addition to the negative impacts, we also talked about what management actions had been taken to mitigate some of these problems, what had to occur with respect to maintaining access to the groundwater supply. And there were many reports of new and replacement and deepening wells. Merced County implemented a truck to water program. Stanislaus County did a variety of things, including the use of water tanks and financial incentives for well deepening. I mentioned before that Delhi implemented a domestic well program to help homeowners. And Modesto suggested that they had to back off some of those, some of their municipal wells. And when they did so, they improved their water quality by doing that. So sort of a redistribution of pumping that was done there. And so we, again, just continuing with the summary of our discussion, we also talked about, you know, we have these negative impacts and what we've done to manage them, and recognizing that really we've identified the aging infrastructure as a big problem here. And TAC members suggested that the use of the groundwater resource really shouldn't be unnecessarily constrained by aging infrastructure. If there was something that we could do about that. There was also a good comment to consider representative well construction, that if there were older shallow wells subject to failure, that it was very difficult to manage for that. And we needed to identify that and see if that could be mitigated in some other manner other than trying to just keep water levels high. And so my little takeaway from the process that's happened so far in some of the discussions is that there's a need for higher water levels for operation of some wells, balanced against the need for others to be able to lower water levels, especially during drought when other supplies aren't available, just to be able to access the water supply. So those were the issues and the details that we talked about. Because we talked quite a bit about domestic wells and older shallow wells and what they were, it occurred to me that it would be helpful perhaps for the TAC members to look at a couple of analysis slides that we put together after the last TAC meeting to begin to better understand the domestic well construction issue and the domestic well location issue. So I have three slides for that. So this is a histogram. We use the DWR well completion report database. We all recognize there are constraints and limitations associated with those data, but to the extent that we could confirm what we were looking at with respect to each one of the wells as being a domestic well and being able to understand its construction details, we have it on this histogram. And then I just have to the right there just to help you a little bit with sort of, you know, interpreting those brown bars that you see on the histograms. About 5% of the wells are shallower than 100 feet. very shallow wells. And then about half of them shallower than 200 feet. And then, 84% of them, most of them are shallower than 300 feet. So that gives us some kind of an understanding about what the construction of the wells are. And that's very helpful from the standpoint of numbers of wells in the basin, but doesn't actually help you with respect to where these are. And so we tried to locate these wells. Sometimes that can be a challenge with these databases. So we actually did some mapping of addresses to the extent that we could from this. And so what we see here are the locations as best as we can figure them out for domestic wells. And they are color-coded by depth. So the orange and red wells are less than about 150 feet deep. The yellow wells are less than about 200 feet deep. And then the greens, as they become darker, are deeper and deeper. And then some of the wells in the sort of central portion of the basin are up to about 500 feet deep. I don't think we had anything that was a domestic well greater than that. So this gives you sort of a picture, a little bit of a snapshot that number one, I think the big takeaway from this is that most of the domestic wells are in the west. And that the shallow wells, most of the shallow wells, you can look at the orange dots and you can see that there are orange dots scattered throughout the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. Most of the orange dots are over to the west, so the western third or so of the basin. Wells generally deepen as you move to the east. And in general, there are very few shallow domestic wells indicated at all in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA. So I took this one step further, and I took the mapping that the counties had done for where they had indicated that wells had failed in some way during the drought. And so I've indicated that by the X's. So I've left the previous map that we saw for the domestic wells, and I've added the X's that indicate some type of well failure or domestic well problem. I think you can see most of the well failures in the Western Turlock Subbasin GSA are actually more toward the eastern portion of that subbasin. And you can see the area, there's a sort of denser area. Let's see if I've got a cursor. There's a sort of dense area up in this area where you have some failed wells. And this really isn't sort of unincorporated area. It's sort of not quite in Houston and a little bit to the east. And so, you just can get some kind of a picture over where you have indications of well problems that occurred during the drought. We've talked about the fact that we don't know if the domestic well owners were able to mitigate their problems, and so now they're fine if we went down to that level again, or if they would continue to have trouble if we went down to that level again. So those are just provided for sort of food for thought and additional information as we go into the process of defining undesirable results and how we might want to set measurable, minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And so this last slide that I have for this topic asks some questions for TAC input. And if you'd like to discuss these in the meeting now, that would be just fine. If you'd like to provide comments and input to the technical team, then perhaps if you could do that. I put there May 1 just because I thought people would already have thought about this since we've talked about it in several TAC meetings. But the point is to come back to you in May and continue this discussion. So here are the questions that I would like for the TAC members to provide input to the technical team. Did the previous slide, and you've got these slides now and in your file, did that previous slide that I have state all of the beneficial uses in the basin? Are there others that I didn't list? And if so, please let me know. If you'd like to categorize them differently or pull something out differently, let me know. Did we capture the negative impacts that have been seen from lowered water levels adequately? Did we hear you and understand you when you provided us your input on those last two TAC meetings? And are there other impacts that you'd like to include? what impacts can't be managed. I think that, in some ways that was the construct I was trying to set up for ourselves, so that if we had an impact and we thought, well, can we manage that? If so, how? And if we can't, then maybe that is one way of getting at sort of how we might represent undesirable results. And then what else is needed to address these questions? If you can think of, I tried to put together these 3 slides on domestic well analysis, and we've talked about a well analysis before. We did that in the basin setting, but if there's anything that you need to help you, TAC members, that the technical team could put together to address these questions, then that would be another thing that would be helpful for us to know. And if you could please provide comments and input to us. I asked for them in a week. If that's too soon, then the biggest point for me is to make sure that we move this along, and that in May we are at a point where we are beginning to define this and talk about real values. So would anyone like to discuss either the process or any of these questions?
Phyllis, this is John Abbey.
Hi.
Hi. Nicely done as always, or as we've come to expect. I wanted to say, with regard to the beneficial uses in the basin, and I'll give you some of these thoughts in writing, to think about the aquifer as a resource within the context of groundwater, that it acts as a prospective storage reservoir in a conjunctive use sense between surface and groundwater. I think a lot of people sort of take that implicitly in the thinking about the use of and availability of groundwater. But the funny thing is, there's both the ability to draw down the aquifer, and then there's the ability or the resource availability of having an empty reservoir, if you will, to put water into. And that's when the aquifer starts to be thought of as a resource in the context of groundwater. So it's not a perfect fit to how you're talking about water, groundwater as uses for agriculture and urban and that, but the aquifer as a reservoir, if you will, is something I think to think about and elaborate on.
I think so too, and one way to look at that is the beneficial use of banking, the beneficial use of managed recharge, the beneficial use of conjunctive use, as you pointed out. And so that certainly is a beneficial use. We need to be able in some areas to rely on the water supply, especially during drought. So that's a good point, and I think it can be added. Anyone else have any ideas on anything? Okay, then let's move along to the next agenda topic, the last one that I'm going to be talking about, and that's agenda topic number 9. There is a seawater intrusion indicator in SGMA that we need to have a discussion on and hopefully get a quick resolution so that we can move along. So as everyone knows, SGMA lists 6 sustainability indicators. Those are summarized here on this slide. And we've had many discussions on sustainable management criteria that pretty much didn't talk about seawater intrusion at all. The technical team has generally looked at the issues and determined it not to be applicable to the Turlock Subbasin from a technical perspective. But really that decision resides with the GSAs and not with the technical team. So we were reminded of that, and we are bringing this back to the joint tax for direction and action. And I have a memo that I have prepared. Actually, there's 2 memos that have gone out for consideration by the joint tax. And I'm going to summarize some of the information that I've got in that memo on these slides. From a technical perspective, we always think of the hydrogeologists of the world typically think of a seawater intrusion problem as a coastal subbasin, a basin where you actually have a saltwater freshwater wedge and you have direct connection, or at least indirect connection potentially, to the open ocean. I think that SGMA and the GSP regulations also look at it that way. the GSP defines seawater intrusion as the advancement of seawater into a groundwater supply, with the emphasis there on seawater. A minimum threshold for this sustainability indicator, the regs say you shall define it by a chloride concentration isocontour in order to define an undesirable result for the sustainability indicator. And that's a shall there in the regulations. So you don't have a lot of room for this sustainability indicator to come up with some other metric. The minimum threshold also has to consider the effects of current and projected sea levels. So that again indicates that connection to an open ocean is really more what this sustainability indicator is referring to. But as many of the technical folks within this subbasin have pointed out over time, we have saline water at depth in our subbasin as well, even though it isn't the ocean. And I apologize for the sort of confused nature of these two cross sections. They actually connect right here. And I knew that Walt would be on the call from Stanislaus County, and I thought he might actually just kill me if I showed my typical vertically exaggerated cross sections to get everything onto one slide again. And so I decided, even though these are vertically exaggerated as well, they are a lot closer to being more realistic than what I usually have been presenting and talking from. So what you see on both of these cross sections, for those who haven't looked at them a lot, are a darker sort of brownish tan color at the bottom of each one of these sections. And there's a heavy dashed line that is indicated as the C2V SIM base of fresh water. This is the base of fresh water as mapped by DWR, and we've talked about what that means. We've used that as a definition for the working or manageable bottom of this basin. So this is not seawater, but we all recognize that it certainly is high TDS water that is elevated in TDS. It goes down into some marine sediments, and there may be some connate water there associated with at least once upon a time saline water. And certainly this saline water could potentially be mobile and move upward if heads are lowered. And that could impact groundwater quality much in the same way that seawater would also impact groundwater quality. But I think that this saline water issue, although it certainly should be addressed in the GSP, falls more in the line with degraded water quality sustainability indicator than with the seawater intrusion sustainability indicator. The degraded water quality indicator talks about management actions that might result in impacts to groundwater quality. And I think that's exactly what we would want to avoid in our subbasin with respect to sort of upconing or pulling upward this saline water at depth. The potential for undesirable results if we went with the water quality indicator could be mitigated through water level management and also through monitoring. So it isn't as if this indicator would prevent us from dealing directly with the deeper saline water issue in the subbasin. So considering everything that I just talked about, this has a lot of words on it, but essentially this is sort of a summary of how the regulations treat things and then a technical recommendation. So beginning at the top of the slide, this is directly from the GSP regulations. It says that an agency is able to demonstrate that undesirable results related to one or more of the sustainability indicators are not present and are not likely to occur in a basin, shall not be required to establish criteria for undesirable results related to those sustainability indicators. So what this is permission within the GSP regulations to recognize that you might not be applicable to one of the indicators, in this case to a seawater intrusion indicator, and that if you have determined that, then you're not required to establish criteria for undesirable results, and sustainable management criteria in the same way that you are required to do that for the other sustainability indicators. And it's interesting that there's even an example in the Department of Water Resources Best Management Practices for Sustainability Management that says GSAs in basins not adjacent to the Pacific Ocean, bays, deltas, or inlets may determine that seawater intrusion is not an applicable sustainability indicator because seawater intrusion does not exist and could not occur. And so that was actually just an example of how a GSA might determine that a sustainability indicator is not applicable, but I think it goes right to the heart of what we've been talking about here. So our technical team is providing a recommendation for TAC consideration to take to the GSAs. And our recommendations are threefold. The first bullet, determine that the seawater intrusion sustainability indicator is not applicable to the Turlock Subbasin and thereby does not require establishment of sustainable management criteria. But also acknowledge the potential for saline water upconing in the basin settings section of the GSP and in the discussion on the water quality degradation sustainability indicator. And then when we get there, we will consider addressing potential future impacts in the GSP monitoring network. And also we will continue to monitor and look for this potential adverse impacts into the future through adaptive management. And then the highlighted take-home message at the very bottom of the slide says the decision to determine the inapplicability of the seawater intrusion indicator needs to be made by the GSAs as recommended by the joint tax, not by the technical team. So at this point, I would like for the tax to consider the material that's been provided here, and you also have a memorandum that you can consider. And let's have a brief discussion as to whether or not this technical recommendation makes sense, if you'd like to modify it, or how you'd like to proceed. I should have thought to put someone on the spot there. Lacey, maybe you would like to engage the TAC in a quick discussion on this.
Sure, this is Lacey. So one quick question. How would you, kind of more of a just like document question. So if the TAC made this, if the TAC agreed to this recommendation and made this recommendation to the GSAs, how would that be reflected in the GSP? Would it be just a quick summary of what you went through already, explaining that this sustainability indicator is not applicable to the Turlock Subbasin for these reasons, and then you kind of walk through what you just walked through with us?
Yes, exactly. And in fact, I anticipated just pulling directly from the memorandum that we have all reviewed and put that into the sustainability indicator. Your chapter on sustainable management criteria will need to address all 6 sustainability indicators. So it will have a section called the Seawater Intrusion Sustainability Indicator. And that section will include as much text as needed to simply summarize what we've just been talking about here and what's in your memorandum already.
Okay, that sounds good, and that makes sense to me. Do any of the other TAC members have any thoughts on the Seawater Intrusion Sustainability Indicator and how we address it?
Hello, this is Milt Treeweiler. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Phyllis, I mean, we can't ignore this saline intrusion problem because it's a reality. It's not going to go away, and it will be an issue. And that sounds like what you're kind of trying to do, just ignore the fact that this will occur at a later date, but we're not going to worry about it.
Oh, I'm so sorry
because
if
it's not direct seawater.
Yeah, please let me correct that. I'm so sorry if that's the impression that I gave. That really wasn't it at all. I was, if I was being dismissive, it was more along the lines of the applicability of this indicator seawater intrusion indicator rather than focusing on the water quality degradation indicator. So we absolutely will need to address it, Milt, no question about it. There are no, except for some anecdotal information, there are no data that we've seen to date that show that this is happening. So it's something that we believe could occur. And one of the things that's going to happen in our GSP process is we're going to be setting water levels that would be protective of this. And we need to think about that when setting the water level minimum thresholds. So if we don't set undesirable results for seawater intrusion, we will still need to set undesirable results for water quality degradation. So in some ways, I'm asking the GSAs if they would like to move their issues associated with the deep saline water away from seawater intrusion, since I think it's less applicable, and shift that to the water quality degradation, which I think is more applicable.
This is Karen.
I can
chime in real quick. Phyllis, there's a big difference between saline water from the brine layer and from irrigation practices, and between that and seawater intrusion, correct?
Correct.
So I think there might be some clarity there. We still have a salts problem. It might just be the source that's needs to be clarified.
I think that's right. And I think that people think in terms of saline water as, you know, the ocean water is saline water, and then we have connate water, which is also saline water, which actually at one time was ocean water. And when we began to tell the TAC that we didn't think that the seawater intrusion sustainability indicator was applicable, then that's when we had the TAC members ask, oh, well, what about our saline water? That's, you know, sort of seawater. And so that's what I was hoping to kind of address a little bit clearer today. And thank you for that clarification. Certainly doesn't mean that elevated TDS water has 35,000 parts per million chloride, which seawater does. So it is a different source. It's not the open ocean. And I do think that the seawater intrusion sustainability indicator anticipates connection to an open ocean.
Phyllis, Milt, Treewiler, once again.
Yes.
I know this is not the point or the part we're not discussing, but I haven't heard any mention of land subsidence, I don't believe today. It's one of the main points, but did you say anything about land subsidence? Because we know we have issues near the Merced County border, and if we dry out the top of the Corcoran clay layer, we're going to have bigger issues of subsidence.
That's absolutely.
So I don't know if this is a time to discuss that or what, but I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Milt. Stay tuned. This entire process, we did mention the subsidence indicator in February, but this process is going a little slower than I thought. So we're going to take these one at a time. And we are right now dealing with chronic lowering of water levels. Now that will relate to subsidence, but we will absolutely get to subsidence. We will not forget you. We're just not going to do that today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Milt.
This is Valerie. If I want other TAC members to talk before I do, but after they're done, I have a couple suggestions.
Kevin would like to speak up.
Great.
Phyllis, great job as usual. And this goes right to, I think, where Valerie wants to be is, I think it could be just a simple resolution of both TACs or the joint TAC with a recommendation to the two GSAs and attaching your memorandum to it. As far as how, I think the question was, how do we dispose of this one item and make the GSP whole? And we've got a lot of other discussion on all the other sustainability issues. So I would recommend that we follow through with that as soon as possible so we can get on to the other issues.
Sounds great. Valerie, did you want to say something now?
Sure. So, and maybe the discussion with Karen was really helpful for me. I think some of the 2020 planning really struggled with this concept of the difference between saltwater intrusion and saline, and to the extent that there are technical differences. In other words, you could say, sorry, that's not me. I don't know if someone has it mute, but the clanking is not me. The extent that we can have a technical distinction between why something is not seawater, even though it's saline, I think is important, because I think we get tied up in trying to kind of think it's your middle bullet point there in your 3 suggestions at the very end about acknowledge that there's potential for saline water. If that's just saline water, it's not seawater intrusion. I think it's important to say, the definition of seawater intrusion is X parts per million, and I'm totally making that up. I'm obviously not technical. And because we don't have any of that in the basin, we can check off that first mark of it doesn't exist in this basin. The second requirement is it's not likely to occur in the future. And again, I think that has to be technical, whether it's talking about the fact, whether it's totally obvious and it's the fact that we're in a valley and we don't have any connection to saline water, and that in order for us to have some sort of saline water connection, mountains would have to move. If we can put that in a more technical manner to address those 2 issues, I think that would be helpful. My suggestion would be to do the same process that Kevin talked about, which is to say 2 things. One, we recommend that the GSAs make a finding based on the technical data that seawater does not currently exist in the basin and is not likely to occur in the future. Those are the 2 prongs, the 2 requirements for not developing sustainable management criteria. So if you find those 2 things, you're on pretty solid ground. And then the third thing, so I guess I would skip that second bullet in the technical recommendations. Then I would say we should definitely consider monitoring and making sure if seawater intrusion all of a sudden occurs, we'll know because of what. What are we going to be doing in the basin to know if it occurs? That seems to be DWR's, in my experience anyway. There are 3 components for determining whether you can sideline a sustainability indicator. Is, does it exist now? Can you prove that it doesn't? Is it likely to exist in the future? And how will you know if it does come online and you're not watching it? So my suggestion would be to amend a little bit, and to the extent that the middle bullet of acknowledging potential saline, if that's supposed to be in water quality, then let's leave it there. I think a couple previous basins made a mistake of mixing and matching because they wanted to do what Phyllis is doing, which is they don't want it to look like you're ignoring salt. But if we know that that saline issue is not seawater, then let's correctly put it in the water quality component. And to the extent that we can and again, I don't know what the technical definition of seawater compared to just salty water is, but I think that's got to go in there and specifically say, here's how we know this isn't from the sea.
If I can say something really quickly, the Water Quality Control Board has drinking water systems monitor for conductivity, quarterly, annually, just kind of depending on your results. So part of water quality, we do monitor for salt, basically.
Yeah. This is Hisham. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Rasad. Okay, so I was going to say, if Vernalis is not in the Turlock groundwater basin, I would say by connectivity-wise, if we are upstream from Vernalis, we should say that we have no connection to the sea. And in my opinion, that should do it. Now, for the third bullet that I think Valerie was talking, considering addressing future, well, if the sea level goes higher and that Vernalis point has moved upstream, we'll look into that then. But as far as what we have today, we have no connection to the ocean.
Yes, and Hisham, I can see that I have confused you just a teeny little bit about the way that I've looked at 2 and 3, the second bullet and the third bullet. That third bullet is assuming that we will deal with deep saline water in the water quality degradation indicator, not in the seawater intrusion indicator. Do you see what I mean? So I'm not saying consider potential future impacts for seawater intrusion from the ocean.
Okay.
I'm talking about consider potential impact. I believe from a technical standpoint, and I also believe from a Sigma standpoint, and from every other GSP that I have read in this state, which is almost all of them, that it is the connectivity to the open ocean that we can just simply say we don't have it, and that connectivity will not occur. I think that is straightforward. And
the only thing that makes me nervous is just by the fact that we are talking about saline water in the basin. Somebody may make the connection with saline water from the ocean. That's my only thing. But thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I use that on purpose because that's where the confusion began. Was people always said, well, we've always talked about saline water being at depth, so why isn't that seawater? And I think that it is trying to pull together. And Valerie, I appreciate very much the look, tying everything back to that very first paragraph that I have on the slide, which is not present and not likely to occur. So seawater is not present in the basin, and seawater is not likely to occur in the basin. That's one. We're not connected to the ocean. Yes, please. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I still have a question on this in regard to this. Okay, I'm looking now at the slide that's showing the map, the 2 map portions. You're talking about the saline portion being at a minus 1,000 feet. Well, that portion of the Central Valley is below sea level. So
Correct.
How do you know? Do you have the geology to prove that there is no water from the sea seeping into our Central Valley area? If there's geology that proves that, I think we could base it on that. But if there's no geology proving that seawater doesn't seep into the Central Valley, then we could use, what you are stating. So what's your comment on that?
There's plenty of information on the coast ranges and the bedrock at depth. I feel very comfortable in assuring you that is not seepage from the ocean and cannot be seepage from the ocean. And I think 10 out of 10 geologists would agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? I think I hear marching orders, but I'm not 100% sure. Do we want to close this loop for sure here?
Yeah, this is Valerie. I just want to also say thanks. This is, I think this is kind of the first, resolution of a sustainable management criteria, even though we're not setting it. And I think usually this is harder because people are unsure how this looks and how it'll go. And I appreciate you kind of marching through all of that. And I agree that I think we can draft up a resolution as long as the TAC, it sounds like they're supportive of it and recommending that the GSAs take that action. I know I've said this 100 times, but it's just really important that our GSAs understand what they're doing and when they're doing it and feel really good about the technical portion of it. I always think of board members that are, probably more lay people like me, and they're just looking for assurance that they're making the right decision and vote. So I think it's helpful to give them this data, and I appreciate you doing it, Phyllis. Thanks.
Great. You're welcome. If there are no other comments on this, what I have heard from the TAC members' direction to me is that I need some clarification on some of my wording. I need to be clearer on source, saline water versus seawater. And I need to speak to the location and geological structure associated with the inland valley in the documentation that's going to go in the sustainable management criteria section. And obviously everyone will have an opportunity to review admin draft, preliminary draft, and final text on that. Do I need to provide anything to, what do I need to provide for there to be the resolution that people are talking about? And maybe that is a comment, that a discussion that will be offline.
This is Lacey with Merced County. That was actually a question that I had as well. I hear talk about a resolution coming from the TAC that's making a recommendation to the board, the GSA boards. So far, this TAC has never passed a resolution. We've always just made recommendations to the boards by vote. Maybe Kevin or Valerie can talk a little bit about, are we looking for a resolution from the TAC itself, or are we looking for just a direction approved by the TAC, a recommendation approved by the TAC that goes to the GSA boards?
Yeah, the latter. You want to make each TAC, which obviously would do it separately, but you can do it jointly if you have the same vote, should make a recommendation. And I don't really think it matters either way if it's a motion or a resolution, depending on how formal you want to be. But make a recommendation that each GSA review the memo that Phyllis will finalize and make either take an action or take a resolution or approve a resolution taking the action that the GSP not develop sustainable management criteria for seawater intrusion that include a summary of the technical write-up that's attached in place of that sustainable management criteria. And the reason I think we should have the GSAs do it is because it's going to be a component that DWR judges in your plan. And I think I want to avoid the issue of, having that come out in a final GSP and then having a GSA say, wait a minute, when did we approve that? Why did we take a hall pass there? So you're right, Lacey, I don't think it should be any action. I think it should be a recommendation from the TAC.
So Valerie, it looks like the West Turlock GSA still doesn't have a quorum at this meeting. Is this something you think we should hold off until the next meeting when we do have a quorum? Can we provide some more informal direction without a quorum, or is this something that you want to see with an action and votes taken where we'd have to wait till another meeting?
I mean, my own thought is, although I want ownership, I don't think there's any immediate hurry. I think from Phyllis's and a consultant perspective, it's nice to put it to bed. My own thought is it's probably better to have a recommendation. If I were the GSA board member, I'd feel much better with a TAC recommendation that we take an action and have a memo supporting that. So, maybe Phyllis finalizes the memo as she described today, and then when the TAC gets back together and has a quorum, they can actually recommend that. I don't think there's any huge hurry though in doing that, frankly.
Okay, that sounds good. Do any members of the TAC have any other thoughts about this, or any concern with going ahead and getting a final memo from Phyllis and then making that recommendation at a future meeting?
This is Kevin. As long as Walt and Hisham and Dennis and yourself don't have any objection, I like your idea of waiting until we could make a joint recommendation at our next meeting.
No issue here from Merced.
Lacey, this is Miguel with the City of Modesto. I joined late. I just wanted to make sure you guys know I'm here. I don't know if you needed me for quorum. Yeah.
So you have a quorum.
Yeah, you do make the quorum.
Okay.
I think Stanislaus had to leave, so I don't know if we still have a quorum even with Esther. Hi, this is Debbie. Sorry.
I think you're right. Is Walt on the phone, or did he drop off? Oh, so close. We'll go ahead and give Phyllis some time to put together a final memo on this, and the TAC will see it at a future meeting as a joint recommendation. Any
Okay,
other
great.
thoughts? Okay, good.
That sounds good, and that completes my agenda items. I was on time there for a while, but I'm sorry I've gone late now. Thank you all for your help.
Thank you, Phyllis. We're going to move right along to item number 10. This is a CV salts update from Kevin.
Oh, great. Thank you. And I think, Phyllis, we are on time. Remember, the TGBA took 20 minutes at the beginning, so everything got pushed back by 20 minutes.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And my report is brief unless there's questions that elongate it. I know, Miguel, you've been attending the CV salts and nitrate management zone meetings. There was one held just before the stay-at-home order came out. And then, of course, the State Water Resources Control Board notified everybody that the, what's the notice that they send out, that you're in violation of the nitrate limits. They notified everybody that that was going to be delayed due to the current crisis. So everything is being pushed back a little bit. I'm not sure what the final dates are going to be. It'll all depend on when we get allowed to go back to work. But there is a meeting coming up that I want to inform you all about on Tuesday. Tuesday, April 28th, from 1:30 to 3. I don't have the information yet. It'll be another meeting like this. If you're interested in it, just send me a note or send a note to one of us, and it'll get to me, and I'll certainly forward the information to you. But at the meeting that was held at the beginning of February, they formed what's called the Valley Water Collaborative. And what the Valley Water Collaborative is going to do is be the organizing committee for a, who knows what it's going to be, what type of organization it's going to be, but basically to handle the implementation of a nitrate management zone plan. So they'll use the initial work that was done, that was developed by the state consultants for the local group, and then the long-term plan, they'll be responsible for that as well. And who pays and all those type of things will be part of what this Valley Water Collaborative will be handling. So it's really interesting stuff, and it's going to affect all of the dairies, of course, and all of the wastewater treatment plants, and anybody basically who adds nitrates to the groundwater basin. So stay tuned, and I'm available for questions if you have any today. Hearing none, that's the end of my report.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Next, we're moving to item number 11. This is the SGMA-related update. We do have a handful of updates that we've identified here in addition to anything that TAC members may have, but we'll start with the public outreach update from Herb.
Thanks, Lacey. I only have two brief items. The first of which would be that we received, as I understand, a few subbasins did, some recommendations on stakeholder input and public outreach from the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. And we received those, I want to say, last week sometime. And yeah, and there's some very good recommendations in there that have prompted me to think about a few things that we can do in addition to our current procedures for outreach, and kind of helping us get towards the best practices we're looking forward to, and going that step beyond, you know, in a lot of areas, standard Sigma compliance for outreach, and kind of taking that next step for transparency. And a lot of the things, as I've read through, I want to say there's about 10 or so of them. I read through a couple of them, and I'm like, those are some really quick fixes that could be done, you know, related to making public comment a little bit more easier in this new digital world that we're doing virtual meetings in, and things like that that can be done up front. And so we're taking a look at that. My goal would be to have that come back in some form at the May TAC meeting, and discuss what we can do about the recommendations that are there, and other recommendations that other agencies may have out there in the public space, may have out there as best practices. As you guys know, there's a lot of agencies and associations and nonprofits and coming out right now with you know, how to kind of do this virtual meeting thing well in the area of Sigma, and in a COVID-19, you know, quarantined world. And so we could probably have like a robust discussion on that, and of course include the Leadership Council's recommendations. And so I would assume, you know, I've just, the update here is we received them. You know, they look good. Many of them, I can't say I've looked detailedly at all of them, but we could have a discussion on that at the next meeting and determine what we may do in terms of actions, and kind of get that input from the sub-basin. So that is my first item. And then the second item is that I sent, or through Tara, she sent around a bill insert that we've been discussing about for a little bit, that is kind of like a smaller version of our fact sheet, you know, a more refined version of the video that we had produced for Sigma engagement and information. And I sent around, or Tara sent around, a draft version. Front is English, back is Spanish, and it's with the intent of us being able to finalize that and get comments, and have that be something that can be provided in digital format to agencies, member agencies of the sub-basin, so that they can, in whatever format they so choose for their customers, send that around at the appropriate time. I know a lot of agencies right now are focusing a lot on COVID-19 and coronavirus communications and continuity of operations and things like that. But nevertheless, at the right timing, we could send that around, or member agencies at their own discretion can send that around, and we can do that. So it was sent around, I want to say 2 weeks or so ago. Tara sent it around, and I asked for some comments. I've received, I want to say 1 or 2 comments from Kevin that were very minimal changes that we can make to the flyer. But unless anyone else has any that came about, you know, I would just say try and get them to me by the end of the week, I would say, and then we'll just kind of finalize it. And I have access to all the files, and I could make changes if needed as we move forward. But then I could finalize it and find a way to get it out to member agencies through Tara and Karen on the east side, or Kevin, and have that be something that's finalized. So it's pretty much ready. I haven't heard a lot from people, but I just wanted to give one final chance before Friday. If there's any comments, send them my way before then, and we could get that done for a time to be distributed. And those are my 2 items. And if there's any questions, happy to field them and answer them.
Herb, this is Lacey. Do you think it would be helpful to ask Tara to send that little mailer out one more time, just to get it to the top of everybody's inbox, so they know they only have till Friday to provide some comments if they had any?
Yeah, I think that's, as long as you know, that's something you know, Tara's agreeable to. It certainly would help, and then we could you know, get it at the top of their mind, and then see if they have comments, and if not, we'll just move forward and start to work on getting that sent out. And then at future meetings, we could discuss like, okay, well, for example, okay, TID, we plan on sending it out this way at this time, you know, say, for example, in June or July or whenever. And then we can follow up with other agencies to see what their paths are too. Because it doesn't have to be, some agencies won't be able to send it out. You won't be able to print off copies necessarily, your 4,000 copies. Maybe they will, maybe they won't for their customers. But at least we could find ways to do it digitally too. But we could cover that as we move forward. But yeah, I would agree.
Okay, well, we'll see if she has the availability to do that. Are there any questions for Herb on the public outreach update? Okay, next is a report from the East Turlock Subbasin GSA on the Prop 218 process. And before I hand this over to Kevin, I just want to say this joint TAC did have a presentation back in the January meeting on the Prop 218 options that were available to the GSAs. Valerie Kincaid walked through those with us, and we did intend to bring it back to the GSA, to the TAC, to the joint TAC. The East Turlock Subbasin GSA has taken some action on this, and I think it's really informative to hear from Kevin what the East Turlock GSA is doing, and then maybe just check in with the TAC members from the West Turlock GSA and see, is this an item that we want to bring back before the West Turlock TAC again, or do we want to table it for a little bit? So Kevin, let's hear from you first on what's going on in the East Turlock Subbasin GSA.
Okay, happy to. Lacey, thank you for that introduction. Yes, this morning, get right to the point. This morning, the East Turlock Subbasin GSA JPA board approved entering a contract with Provost and Pritchard to complete a engineer's report and help us with the Prop 218 process. This followed, well, over the last couple of months, I guess, we requested qualifications from 3 different consultants. P&P was selected last month by the board to work with them to negotiate a contract, and that contract was authorized today. So we're looking at doing, this is just for, correct me if I'm wrong, Lacey, the cost of implementing the GSA and putting the GSP together. So it's not for any future capital projects or anything like that, but we're looking at a per acre charge for those who need to raise some funds. Of the 5 members of the East Turlock Subbasin GSA that need to raise funds to pay for this implementation, to create through the Prop 218 process a per acre charge so that the funds will be there to complete this process. And that's all I really had, unless you want to add in Lacey or Dennis or anybody else who was there this morning.
I think that's a good summary of what you're doing. I don't have anything to add. Dennis?
No, I don't have anything to add. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Well, then,
so,
if there's I'll give it back to you, Lacey, and see if there's any interest on the west side for any further questions.
Yeah, so that's exactly where I was going. So for the West Turlock Subbasin GSA tax members, is there an interest from the tax members in bringing this item, this Prop 218 item, back to a future tax meeting in the near future, or is this something that you want to just table for a little bit? If there are some tax members who really want to talk about this soon, we can put it on a future agenda. Happy to do that. Just checking with the tax members, is there an interest in that?
This is Karen with Series. Politically, right now, there's a lot of change in council and all that kind of stuff right now. I know that it's kind of a sticky time to bring up charging people more money. So I would recommend tabling this for a few meetings.
Okay, no problem. Hearing nobody else, we'll go ahead and just set this on kind of the back burner for now, and maybe we'll be able to bring it back up in a future meeting. If you are a TAC member and this is something that your agency is interested in pursuing in the future and it hasn't come back up yet, just feel free to say something and we can get it on the agenda and talk about it again. Since we did talk about it in January, we didn't want to not return to the TAC with both an update and the ability for one of the agencies who is interested in this to say it's something we want to pursue, or, you know, if there is not an interest in pursuing it at this time because maybe it's not the right time, like Karen mentioned, then we can just put it, pull it off any future agenda and just put it on the back burner for now. So we'll go ahead and do that. Like I said, if you have an interest in it, just bring it back up to myself or Debbie or anybody. Next item for SIGMA related updates is the special technical workshops and the TAC schedule. So it's ironic that this is happening at 4 p.m. and our meeting is still going, the meeting that's supposed to go till 4. Part of this item is looking at the TAC schedule and looking at how long our meetings have been going. So we're scheduled from 2 to 4. And we do want to be respectful for everybody's time and not really go past this 4 o'clock time limit that we've been giving ourselves for the past couple of years for this meeting. We've been going till 4, but we do have a lot to discuss. And I think especially as we go through the sustainability indicators and we go through these more sustainable management criteria and the technical topics, perhaps 2 to 4 p.m. once a month is not quite enough. And so we've had some just internal discussion, and I'll let Debbie maybe talk about it a little bit, about having some special workshops during the months that we have these technical topics to talk about. So this would be in addition to the TAC meeting. We would have another meeting that would be more of a special technical workshop for the TAC members to work through some of these technical items. And we would also have our TAC meeting, and hopefully we could keep our TAC meeting to that time limit that we've always tried to keep it to. Debbie, am I missing anything here?
Thank you, Lacey. No, I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, we realize that people have you know, other commitments, and we're trying to be respectful of time, but we're still trying to move this process forward, and we have deadlines, you know, to get everything finished up, and sometimes these things require conversation, especially as we get into more you know, some of these more interesting topics. Some of the technical stuff early on, it was more of a presentation, and then we moved on. But some of these other things may require a lot more discussion. And so we wanted to provide the time to do that and still kind of be respectful of what's been scheduled and you know, what other commitments people have. And so what we're suggesting that we consider as we move forward is to broach the subject of having some special, very focused workshops on some of these topics as we move forward. So perhaps some, as Phyllis is developing content or specific things with respect to the sustainability indicators or projects or you know, something like that, we could have a focus kind of meeting on some of those topics in between the TAC meetings, and then keep us moving forward and bring it back to the TAC if there's additional discussion that's needed or that sort of thing. And so it'll keep us on time during the TAC meetings, hopefully, but give us the additional time that appears to be needed to have some of these conversations. And so we wanted to reach out to the TAC members to see their willingness to kind of schedule additional meetings along the way.
And for just for a clarification, this wouldn't be we're not looking for like an ad hoc or a smaller group. This would be for the whole TAC. So
Yes,
it would be
ma'am.
a Brown Act meeting for the whole TAC.
Yes. So are there thoughts from the different, the two GSA TAC members?
This is Karen.
on-
Sorry, I think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Karen.
This is Curtis. I would agree.
Anyone from the East Turlock? Is anyone left from the East Turlock?
Yeah, Kevin's still here. You know I'm in agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dennis, I'm still there too. That sounds like a good idea.
Thank you, Dennis. Does anyone oppose this approach? Okay, so my second question to you is, should we try to find a time that people could try to set aside? Because sometimes it's difficult to schedule things in between. So one alternative could be to tentatively schedule something, and then if necessary, we'll cancel that and give people as much notice as we possibly can so that they can fill in their schedules accordingly. Or it could be a bonus hour and a half to 2 hours that you have to work on something else. Would that approach work, or would it be better to just find a time? Sometimes when we have to find a time, sometimes it's hard to get a quorum.
This is Karen. I think it's a good idea to schedule in advance. That way you have that chunk of time set aside every month, and if you don't use it, you don't use it.
Debbie, it's Lacey. Are you suggesting schedule in advance, maybe every month, a second meeting, a second special workshop every month for the next maybe handful of months this year? And then if we don't end up needing those, we'll just go ahead and cancel them and let people know as soon as possible that we don't need that technical workshop that month?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking, because I think it might be easier to have people include it in their schedule that way. Otherwise, we might not have enough people to have the conversation. There's just too many members in this group.
I have a question. Is this something that, you know, I know you work with Phyllis a lot. Is this something that maybe Phyllis could help guide us on when we need to have these longer discussions so that we can kind of figure out when we need to be doing these, if it's monthly or every other month? Do you know what I mean?
Sure. I think it's gonna, in some ways, depend on how quickly we're able to go through some of these things. So we have a general schedule for, you know, the process. But some of these conversations have taken a little longer in some instances, or we've sent, we will send her back and ask her to tweak something, and then you need to, you know, get to another item of discussion. So I think it might evolve a little bit. I could be wrong. Phyllis, you might, if you have some thoughts on it, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, my thoughts are, I'm worried about the schedule. Where, you know, I certainly respect and understand that there is a tremendous amount of discussion that needs to occur with each one of these sustainability indicators. I have seen this process work in several subbasins now, and I can just share with you that I'm getting concerned that we're really taking a lot of time on everything. And we need to be talking about projects now. You know, Kevin had suggested that I change the schedule, and it's like, you know what, we need to start doing some, we're going to need to walk and chew gum for a little while. it feels to me, you know, even today, something that I thought was going to take, 10 minutes, which was the seawater intrusion issue. Now we're going to need to revise a memo and get some things written and get some things together and get a recommendation. I'm not complaining about it, but I am worried about it. And so at this point, I would suggest, as slow as everything is going, that we commit to some sort of a technical workshop for at least the next few months. Otherwise, we're really going to be in a bind, I think.
I would agree. So let's see if we can find a date that works for most people. We could try a doodle poll or something like that, and then kind of schedule something out over the next couple months for an additional meeting, maybe through the end of the year, and then we'll cancel them if we don't need them. If people aren't opposed to that. So if somebody has
Can I?
Go, please.
I had a question there. I'm getting, this is John Lambie. I'm getting a bit confused as to the process that's being suggested. Is it that these special technical workshops would still be meetings formally of the TAC, such the TAC would make recommendations or advisements? Or could they be more along the lines of a review of a technical issue, a discussion, a perfection, say, of a memo that's then taken up at the every other formal TAC meeting? As I stand as Kevin's stand-in when he can't make it for these things as an official TAC member, otherwise I'm here as sort of a advisor. So partly that impacts me that way, but I should think that might be a construct, or am I confused here as to what's being proposed? Is it 2 TAC meetings a month or a special tech workshop and a TAC meeting every month?
Hi, this is Debbie. I would say it is a special TAC meeting that gives us the most flexibility. We could tweak things and send it back to the TAC the next meeting because there's something additional that's needed, but that would give us the most flexibility to move things forward, which is what I believe Phyllis is saying we need to be able to do.
Yeah, John, and this is Phyllis. I was just going to say, it seems to me it's the latter of the two that you're thinking about. That there's a special dedicated meeting just for the issue, and then there's a regular TAC meeting as well.
Well, I guess what I meant was that it is a TAC meeting. It's a special TAC meeting, but it's going to be focused on a specific issue. Yes. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
Evan, maybe I could help. And John, I think you brought up a good point is, if we have these meetings, Debbie, we get into the whole noticing and posting agendas and things like that. So it does create a lot more work for a lot of people. But it's probably not that much to post an agenda. And if we don't get a quorum, we don't get a quorum. But if no actions on these agendas are going to occur, can we simplify the agenda saying it's a workshop for those who attend to, and the public, of course, to talk about this item?
It could be. It would be a special meeting regardless. So I think we could play it by ear perhaps, but I would kind of say that we need the ability to have it be a TAC meeting so we could move things forward.
This is Lacey, and I would agree that since every TAC member is going to be invited to this meeting, we'd probably just want to post it as a TAC meeting. And I would caution that we probably don't want to get into the habit of having, if we can avoid it, of having the special technical workshop where we're discussing an item, trying to move the schedule along a little quicker, but then we have to bring it back to the TAC meeting every month where we're probably going to discuss it again. I think that's probably not going to move things along like Phyllis is wanting to do. It's just going to make us talk about something twice when the purpose of the extra meeting is to start having these conversations and making some recommendations and making some progress instead of bringing it back to the TAC again. But if it's something that the TAC wants to talk about a second time, then by all means, we can do that.
All right, I agree to see how it goes.
Okay, so
Okay,
not hearing any opposition. Is that what you need, Debbie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Moving right along. So the last item that we have listed as a bullet point is interbasin coordination, and this is just a heads up to the TAC members about a interbasin coordination meeting that we're scheduling between the Turlock Subbasin and the Modesto Subbasin. It looks like it's scheduled for May 20th at 9 a.m. At this time, it's a conference call. If you're interested in participating in that meeting, I would say let Tara know so you can get the invitation and the details for the meeting. If we have a quorum of TAC members that are interested in participating in that, like we were just talking about, we'll need to go ahead and post it because we'll have a quorum of TAC members. So I would let Tara know if you're interested in participating in that meeting, and we can make sure that everybody who's interested can join. Phyllis mentioned earlier, I think it's, Phyllis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's going to be discussion of the water budgets that will be done now for Modesto and Turlock. I think that's when you mentioned this meeting earlier in today's meeting.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Okay.
Lacey, sorry, this is Debbie. Typically what we've done with those coordination workshops is to post the agenda and include that no decision would be made at that point, but that it facilitates the ability to not only have the TAC present, but if there's board members as well, because we don't know what quorums may or may not show up, and so it gives us that flexibility.
Okay, so the meeting will be posted anyway.
Yes.
And it's a conference call scheduled at this time.
Yes.
Does anybody else have anything for Sigma related updates? Okay, hearing nothing else. So our next meeting is scheduled for May 28th. Unless you hear otherwise, we'll do it the same way as a Zoom meeting conference call. You'll hear more from us on how that meeting will take place. And is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion. This is Debbie.
Karen will motion again. Second.
This is
All
Dennis.
in favor?
I'll move for the east side.
Great.
East side's adjourned.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, aye, aye.
Great. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.